The water was dark and cold that morning when Eric, Lindgren, and his diving team went down into the Baltic Sea. They were looking for a German submarine that had sunk during the Second World War. Many ships and submarines rested at the bottom of these waters, and finding them was Eric's job. He had been doing this work for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything the sea could hide. He was wrong. The dive started like any other. Eric checked his equipment twice, as he always did. His team of 4 divers followed him into the water. The visibility was poor, maybe 10 meters at best. They used lights attached to their helmets to see through the murky depths. The seafloor here was mostly sand and mud, with rocks scattered here and there. Eric followed the coordinates on his underwater GPS. According to old records, the submarine should be somewhere in this area after 20 minutes of searching. One of his team members, a young woman named Sophia, signaled that she had found something. Eric swam toward her light. What he saw made him stop moving completely. It was not a submarine. The object in front of them was massive. It stretched far beyond what their lights could reveal. The surface was smooth, almost like glass, but it was clearly metal of some kind. Eric touched it with his gloved hand. The material was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was cold, but not as cold as it should have been at this depth. There was no rust, no damage from the salt water, nothing to show how long it had been sitting here. Eric looked at Sophia, even through her diving mask. He could see the confusion in her eyes. They both knew this was not normal. This was not any ship they had ever learned about. This was something else entirely. They spent the next hour swimming around the object, trying to understand its shape and size. It was buried partially in the sediment, so they could only see the top portion. But what they could see was enough to make their hearts beat faster. The object was at least 200 meters long, maybe more. It had smooth curves and strange angles that did not match any ship design from any period in history. There were markings on the surface, but they were not letters or numbers that Eric recognized. When they returned to their boat, nobody spoke for a long time. Eric finally broke the silence. He told his team that they would not tell anyone about this yet. First, they needed to understand what they had found. He did not want to look foolish if this turned out to be some kind of art project or secret military test. But deep inside, he already knew this was neither of those things. Over the next week, Eric made several more dives to the site. He took photographs and video recordings. He collected small samples of sediment from around the object. He measured what he could and documented everything carefully. The more he learned, the more questions he had. The object showed no signs of being built by any known civilization. The metal did not match any alloy in his reference books. The design was too advanced. Too strange. Eric finally made a phone call to an old friend who worked at a university in Stockholm. His friend was a professor of marine archaeology, a serious man who did not believe in wild stories. Eric sent him some of the photographs. The professor called back within an hour. His voice was shaking. Within days, the Swedish government sent a team to investigate. They told Eric and his divers to stay away from the site and to speak to no one about what they had found. Eric agreed, but he watched from a distance as military ships arrived and set up a perimeter around the location. Whatever was down there, it was now a matter of national security. The government tried to keep the discovery secret. But secrets are hard to keep when so many people are involved. Within a month, other nations began asking questions. Satellite images showed unusual activity in the Baltic Sea. Intelligence agencies from around the world started paying attention. The Swedish government had no choice but to share what they knew with their closest allies. What followed was a series of secret meetings between the most powerful nations on Earth. Scientists who attended these meetings later said they felt like they were living inside a science fiction story. The object in the Baltic Sea was not a lost ship from human history. Initial analysis suggested it was thousands of years old, possibly older. The technology used to build it was beyond anything that existed today. Some people called it a relic from an ancient civilization that history had forgotten. Others whispered about visitors from other worlds. A few suggested it was a message left behind for future generations to find. Nobody knew for certain, and the arguments continued for months. A coalition was formed. 12 nations agreed to work together to study the object. They called it the Baltic Research Initiative, and they gave it unlimited funding. The best scientists, engineers, and historians from around the world were recruited. Security was extremely tight. Everyone who joined the project had to sign papers promising they would never speak about their work. Eric Lindgren was offered a position on the team. He accepted without hesitation. He had found this thing, and he wanted to be there when its secrets were revealed. The research facility was built on an island that had been cleared of all civilians. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary military base, but underground, there were laboratories filled with the most advanced equipment money could buy. Teams worked around the clock, studying every piece of information they could gather about the object. The first major breakthrough came 6 months after the coalition was formed. A team of engineers discovered that the object was not solid. It was hollow. It had rooms inside, corridors, spaces that suggested it was meant to carry people or cargo. It was a vessel of some kind. A ship. This changed everything. The nations involved became more interested and more competitive. Everyone wanted to be the first to unlock the ship's secrets. Everyone wanted to claim its technology for themselves. The spirit of cooperation that had started the project began to crack. Eric watched all of this with growing worry. He had hoped that finding something so incredible would bring humanity together. Instead, he saw old rivalries returning. He saw greed and fear in the eyes of powerful men. He saw the beginning of a new kind of conflict, one that would be fought not with weapons, but with knowledge. The Relic had been sleeping at the bottom of the sea for countless ages. Now, it was awake in the minds of humanity. And humanity, Eric realized, might not be ready for what they had found. The divers had gone looking for the past. What they found instead was something that would change the future forever. The discovery was only the beginning. The real story was about to start. The decision to raise the ship from the seafloor was not made quickly. For 18 months, the coalition argued about whether it was safe, whether it was wise, and most importantly, who would control the operation. Every nation wanted a piece of whatever technology lay inside that ancient vessel. Trust between partners grew thin as the prize grew larger. Finally, they reached an agreement. The ship would be raised and moved to a secure location in international waters. A massive platform would be built specifically for this purpose. The cost would be shared equally among all participating nations, and all discoveries would belong to everyone. At least that was what they put in writing. The platform took 2 years to construct. It was the largest floating structure ever built by human hands. Engineers called it Titan Base. It had laboratories, living quarters for 500 workers, storage facilities, and enough power generators to light a small city. Heavy cranes were installed that could lift objects weighing thousands of tons. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before. Eric Lindgren stood on the deck of Titan Base on the day the lifting operation began. The morning air was cold and salty. Around him, hundreds of workers moved with nervous energy. Everyone knew that history was being made. Everyone also knew that things could go terribly wrong. The lifting cables had been attached to the buried ship over the previous months. Divers had worked in shifts, carefully securing the massive object without damaging it. Now the cranes began to pull. The cables grew tight. The entire platform groaned under the strain. For 6 hours, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the water below the platform began to change. Bubbles rose to the surface. The sea turned brown with disturbed sediment. Workers gathered at the railings, watching with wide eyes. Something was moving down there. Something big. The ship broke the surface just before sunset. Water poured off its smooth hull in great waterfalls. The dying light of the sun reflected off metal that had not seen the sky in thousands of years. People gasped. Some cried. A few fell to their knees. Eric simply stared, unable to move or speak. It was beautiful. That was the only word that came to his mind. The ship was not just a machine. It was a work of art. Its curves were graceful, its proportions perfect. Even covered in mud and sea growth, it took the breath away from everyone who looked at it. The ship was brought fully onto the platform over the next 3 days. Workers cleaned its surface carefully, revealing more of its strange design. The hull was made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb light. In some places, there were panels that looked like they could open. In others, there were shapes that might have been windows, though they showed only blackness inside. Scientists began their work immediately. They took samples of the hull material and analyzed them in the onboard laboratories. The results confused everyone. The metal was an alloy that contained elements arranged in ways that should not be possible. It was stronger than anything humans could produce. It was resistant to heat, cold, and corrosion. And yet it was surprisingly light. Teams of engineers tried to find a way inside the ship. They searched for doors, hatches, any kind of opening. For weeks, they found nothing. The hull seemed to be one continuous piece, with no seams or joints visible to the naked eye. Some scientists suggested cutting through the hull, but others argued that this might damage whatever was inside. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young researcher named Maya Chen was studying the strange markings on the ship's surface. Most people thought these were decorations or writing in an unknown language. Maya thought differently. She believed they were instructions, working with computer programs that could analyze patterns. Maya discovered that the markings were not random. They formed a kind of map of the ship's exterior. By following certain sequences, she found a section of hull that was different from the rest. When pressure was applied to specific points in a specific order, a door slid open without a sound. The news spread through Titan Base within minutes. A door was open. A way inside had been found. The question now was who would be first to enter. The coalition had rules about this. A team of 6 scientists from 6 different countries would go in together. They wore protective suits, carried cameras, and moved slowly through corridors that no human had ever walked. What they found inside was both amazing and terrifying. The ship was huge inside, even bigger than it appeared from outside. Corridors stretched in every direction, lit by a faint blue glow that came from the walls themselves. The air was clean and fresh, as if the ship had been preparing for visitors. There were rooms filled with equipment that nobody could identify. There were screens that showed images nobody could understand. Everything was alien and familiar at the same time. In the center of the ship, they found what could only be described as a command room. There were stations arranged in a circle, facing a large empty space in the middle. The stations had controls built into them, though the controls were not buttons or switches. There were surfaces that seemed to react to touch. One of the scientists placed his hand on a control surface. The ship responded immediately. Lights came on throughout the vessel. Screens activated, displaying information in symbols that scrolled too fast to read. A deep hum filled the air, like a giant machine waking from a long sleep. The scientist pulled his hand away quickly. The humming stopped. The lights dimmed. But something had changed. The ship knew they were there now. It was waiting for them. Over the following months, teams explored every part of the ship. They mapped its interior, documented its systems, and collected data that would take decades to fully analyze. They found what appeared to be living quarters, suggesting the ship was designed for crew. They found storage areas filled with containers that held substances they could not identify. They found a room that seemed to be for medical treatment, with equipment that scanned the body in ways human doctors could only dream about. But the most important discovery was the power source. Deep in the ship's core, there was a chamber that contained something that made energy. The scientists did not understand how it worked. The physics did not match any known theory. But the output was clear. This single chamber could produce more power than all the nuclear plants on Earth combined. This was when the real problems began. Nations started to accuse each other of stealing information. Secret meetings were held. Intelligence agents were sent to spy on former allies. The coalition that had been built on cooperation was falling, part because of greed. Eric watched all of this with a heavy heart. The ship that had amazed him now frightened him. Not because of what it was, but because of what it was doing to humanity. People were not fighting over land or resources anymore. They were fighting over knowledge. They were fighting over power. and this ship had more power than anything the world had ever seen. The excavation was complete. But the excavation of human nature had only begun. The ship sat on its platform, waiting. It had survived ages beneath the sea. Now, it would have to survive something much more dangerous. It would have to survive humanity's desire to possess it completely. The ancient vessel had been raised from the depths. But the depths of human ambition were only starting to be revealed. The arguments lasted for months. Scientists wanted more time to study the ship safely. Military officials wanted to see what it could do. Politicians worried about falling behind other nations. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone believed they were right. In the end, the military won. Orders came from the highest levels of government. The ship would be activated. A full power test would be conducted. The decision was final. Maya Chen was one of the few scientists who supported the decision. She had spent more time studying the ship's systems than anyone else. She believed she understood how to communicate with it. She believed she could control it. Her confidence convinced the military commanders to move forward. Eric Lindgren disagreed strongly. He had seen how the ship responded to even small actions. He had felt its presence growing stronger every day, as if it was waking up slowly from a very long dream. He tried to warn the commanders that they were moving too fast. They did not listen. He was just a diver who had gotten lucky. What did he know about ancient technology? The activation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early spring. The weather was calm, the sea was flat, and Titan Base was cleared of all non-essential personnel. Only 200 people remained on the platform. 50 of them were scientists and engineers. The rest were military guards who carried weapons they hoped they would never need to use. Maya took her position at the main control station inside the command room. Around her, a dozen other experts sat at secondary stations, ready to monitor every system on the ship. Cameras recorded everything. Data recorders captured every signal. If something went wrong, they would at least know what had happened. At exactly 9 o'clock, Maya placed both hands on the control surface. She closed her eyes and concentrated. She had practiced this moment many times in simulation. She knew what sequences to follow, what patterns to trace. The ship had shown her during previous experiments. It had been teaching her. The response was immediate. Light flooded the command room. Not the gentle blue glow they had seen before, but brilliant white light that came from everywhere at once. The hum they had heard during the first exploration returned. This time it was deeper, stronger, and it vibrated through the entire structure. People grabbed their stations to keep their balance. Maya opened her eyes. The screens around her were alive with information. She could not read the symbols, but she understood them somehow. The ship was talking to her, showing her what it was capable of. It's asking her what she wanted it to do. On the platform above, something incredible was happening. The ship was rising. It lifted off the deck slowly, silently, with no visible means of support. Workers ran for cover as the massive vessel floated into the air like a soap bubble. It rose 50 meters, then stopped, hovering as if gravity had simply decided to take a break. Inside the command room, Maya felt tears running down her face. She was not sad. She was overwhelmed. The power flowing through the ship was unimaginable. She could feel it like heat on her skin. The ship was not just a machine. It was alive in some way she could not explain. It was awake now, fully awake, and it was ready. The military observers watched from a safe distance through binoculars. They saw the ship hanging in the air. They saw panels opening along its hull, revealing structures that could only be weapons. They saw energy gathering around these structures, creating a glow that was visible even in daylight. One of the observers was Admiral James Morrison, a veteran who had served in 3 wars. He had seen terrible things in his life. He had made peace with death long ago. But when he saw that ship floating above Titan Base, weapons charged and ready, he felt fear for the first time in 40 years. The ship's systems came online one by one. Navigation, communication, life support, defense. Each. The system was more advanced than anything human engineers had ever created. The ship could travel at speeds that should have been impossible. It could communicate across distances that would take radio signals years to cross. Its defenses could stop any known weapon. And then there were the weapons themselves. Maya explored the weapons systems carefully. The ship showed her what each one could do. There were energy beams that could cut through any material. There were projectiles that could track targets across entire planetary systems. There were shields that could absorb nuclear explosions without damage. And there was something else, something the ship called the final option. Maya did not ask what that was. She was afraid to know. The test was supposed to last 1 hour. It lasted 3. Maya could not stop exploring. Every minute brought new discoveries, new wonders, new terrors. The ship had been built for war. That much was clear. But it had been built for a war on a scale that humanity had never imagined. When Maya finally shut down the systems, she was exhausted. She could barely stand. Engineers helped her out of the command room and onto the platform. The ship lowered itself back down gently, settling on the deck as if it had never moved. Eric was waiting for her. He had watched the entire test from the observation room. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He asked Maya one simple question. What have we done? Maya did not have an answer. She had felt the ship's power. She had also felt something else, something hidden beneath the systems and the weapons. A sadness. A warning. The ship had been built by people who were desperate. People who had faced an enemy so terrible that they needed the ultimate weapon to survive, and even then, it had not been enough. The world outside Titan Base was changing quickly. Video footage of the floating ship had been captured by satellites and leaked to the press within hours. News channels played the images on endless loops. Experts gave opinions without knowing any facts. Governments issued statements that said nothing of importance. Some people celebrated. They saw the ship as proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. They saw hope for new technologies that could solve all of Earth's problems. They dreamed of traveling to other stars. Others were terrified. They saw the ship as a threat. They demanded it be destroyed before it could be used. They protested in the streets, holding signs that called the ship a demon, a curse, an end to everything they knew. The governments that controlled the ship tried to calm everyone down. They promised that the technology would be used for peaceful purposes. They promised that all nations would benefit equally. They promised safety and cooperation and a bright future. But behind closed doors, very different conversations were happening. Military planners were already drawing up scenarios. How could this ship be used in a war? How could it be defended? What would happen if an enemy nation somehow took control of it? The answers to these questions were frightening. The ship had changed everything. The balance of power that had kept the world stable for decades was now meaningless. Whoever controlled this ship controlled the future. Everyone knew it. Everyone wanted it. And the ship itself sat quietly on its platform. Watching everything with sensors that humanity did not understand, it had been awake before, long ago, in a different time, in a different place. It knew what happened when civilizations discovered power. They were not ready to handle it. Had seen this story before. Maya had felt that sadness in its systems. She had felt the ship's memory of what came before. She tried to tell the commanders, but they were not interested in feelings. They were interested in firepower. They were interested in winning. The awakening was complete. The ship was ready for whatever came next. The only question now was whether humanity was ready too. The answer, as the whole world would soon discover, was no. The world changed on a Thursday afternoon. It happened so fast that most people did not understand what was happening until it was over. Some never understood at all. For 6 months after the awakening, the nations that controlled the ship had argued constantly. The coalition was falling apart. Secret deals were being made. Spies were everywhere. Every country wanted exclusive control of the ancient vessel. The promises of cooperation meant nothing when the stakes were this high. The ship had been given a name now. They called it Prometheus, after the Greek god who brought fire to humanity. The name was meant to be hopeful. Fire could warm homes and cook food. But fire could also burn cities to the ground. Everyone hoped for the first outcome. Everyone feared the second, the Eastern Alliance. A group of nations that had been excluded from the original coalition grew more aggressive every week. They demanded access to Prometheus. They demanded a share of its technology. When these demands were refused, their tone changed from request to threat. Intelligence reports warned that something was coming. Satellites showed military forces gathering. Communication intercepts revealed planning for what the analysts called a decisive action. The commanders at Titan Base increased security. More ships were brought in to form a protective circle around the platform. Fighter jets flew overhead day and night. Eric Lindgren watched all of this with growing dread. He had never been a soldier. He was just a diver who had found something he was not supposed to find. Now he was trapped in the middle of what might become the next World War. He wanted to leave, to go home, to forget everything he had seen. But he could not abandon Maya and the others. They were his friends now. They had shared something that nobody else on Earth could understand. Maya spent her days inside Prometheus, learning more about its systems. The ship continued to teach her, showing her things that amazed and horrified her in equal measure. She learned that Prometheus was not just a warship, it was a survivor. It was the last of a fleet that had been built by a civilization far older than humanity. That civilization was gone now. Prometheus did not explain what had happened to them. Some truths were too terrible to share. The attack came without warning. It started with missiles. Dozens of them launched from submarines that had crept close to Titan Base during the night. They came in low and fast, designed to overwhelm the defenses that protected the platform. Alarms screamed. Soldiers ran to their positions. Chaos spread across the deck like fire, but Prometheus was already awake. Maya was not in the command room when the first missiles appeared on the ship's sensors. She did not need to be. Prometheus had been watching, waiting, preparing for exactly this kind of attack. Its defensive systems activated automatically. Energy shields surrounded Titan Base like an invisible dome. The first wave of missiles hit the shields and exploded harmlessly, their fire washing over the barrier like water on glass. The Eastern Alliance had expected resistance. They had not expected this. The second wave of the attack involved ships. A full battle fleet emerged from the morning fog, guns blazing, heading straight for Titan Base. Destroyers, cruisers, even an aircraft carrier that launched dozens of fighter jets into the sky. It was the largest naval force assembled since the Great Wars of the 20th century. Maya reached the command room in time to see the fleet on the ship's screens. Her hands trembled as she touched the control surface. She could feel Prometheus asking her a question. Should it defend itself? Should it protect the humans who had woken it from its long sleep? She thought about her answer for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said yes. What happened next would be studied and debated for generations. Prometheus rose from the platform, its hull glowing with stored energy. Panels opened along its sides, revealing weapons that had not been used in countless ages. The ship moved forward, slowly at first, then faster. Directly toward the attacking fleet, the fleet responded with everything it had. Guns fired, missiles launched, torpedoes raced through the water. Every weapon that modern humanity had developed was thrown at Prometheus in those desperate minutes. None of it mattered. Prometheus absorbed the attacks without damage. Its shields flickered occasionally but never failed. The ancient ship continued forward, unstoppable, inevitable. When it reached the fleet, it did not slow down. Energy beams lanced out from Prometheus. They struck ships with surgical precision, cutting through armor like paper. Destroyers broke in half and sank within seconds. Cruisers exploded in towers of flame. Fighter jets fell from the sky, their systems disabled by weapons that humanity had no name for. The aircraft carrier tried to turn and run. It was the flagship of the fleet, carrying thousands of sailors who were just following orders. Prometheus caught it before it could escape. A single beam struck the carrier's power systems. The great ship lost all power instantly. It drifted, helpless, as Prometheus hovered above it. Maya could have destroyed the carrier. Prometheus was ready to do so. The ship's systems highlighted every weakness in the vessel, showing her exactly where to strike for maximum effect. All she had to do was think the command. She did not give the command. Instead, she told Prometheus to stop. The ancient ship accepted her decision. The weapons powered down. The shields remained active, but no more attacks were launched. The aircraft carrier and its crew were spared. The battle was over in 17 minutes. The Eastern Alliance lost 42 ships that day. Over 3,000 sailors died in the cold waters around Titan Base. Many more were wounded. The survivors floated in life rafts, watching as Prometheus returned to its platform and settled down gently. As if nothing had happened, the rest of the world watched through satellite footage that was broadcast on every channel. They saw the most powerful navy in the Eastern Alliance destroyed by a single ship. They saw weapons that made their own armies look like children with toys. They saw the future of warfare, and it terrified them. Eric found Maya sitting alone in the command room after it was over. She was crying silently. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold them still. She told Eric that she had felt every death. Prometheus had shown her, made her experience the final moments of sailors who were only doing their duty. The ship had not done this to punish her. It had done this to teach her, to make sure she understood the weight of the power she now held. The days that followed were filled with emergency meetings, desperate negotiations, and public panic. The Eastern Alliance demanded justice for their lost sailors. The controlling nations demanded surrender. Neither side was willing to back down. The world balanced on the edge of total war. But something had changed in the minds of the leaders who had seen the battle footage. They had seen what Prometheus could do when it was holding back, when it was showing mercy, when a young woman with a conscience was at its controls. They did not want to see what it could do when it was not holding back. Fear became the foundation of a new world order. Not trust, not cooperation, not shared values, just fear. The fear that Prometheus inspired was the only thing powerful enough to stop the nations of Earth from destroying each other. It was not the peace that anyone had hoped for, but it was peace of a kind. The reckoning had come. Humanity had seen what it was capable of when it had the ultimate weapon. The answer had been written in fire and blood on the surface of the sea. Now everyone had to decide what to do with that knowledge. The world was different now. There was no going back. The only direction was forward, into an uncertain future shaped by a ship that had survived the death of one civilization and might now witness the birth or death of another. 1 year had passed since the battle that changed everything. The world was different now. Not better, not worse, just different. The fear of Prometheus hung over every nation like a storm cloud that never quite broke. Wars still happened, but they were small and quiet. Nobody wanted to attract the attention of the ancient ship that had shown what true power looked like. Titan Base had become the most important place on Earth. It was no longer just a research platform. It was the center of a new international order. Representatives from every nation came there to talk, to negotiate, to make deals under the watchful presence of Prometheus. The ship never participated in these meetings, but everyone knew it was listening. Everyone knew what would happen if the talking stopped and the fighting started. Maya Chen had become the most important person in the world. Though she hated that idea, she was the only one who could communicate with Prometheus properly. Other scientists had tried to learn, but the ship did not respond to them the way it responded to her. There was a connection between them that nobody could explain. Maya had stopped trying to explain it. She just accepted it. She spent most of her days inside Prometheus now. The ship had become her home, her teacher, her friend. It showed her things that no human had ever seen. It shared memories from its creators, images and feelings from a civilization that had risen and fallen long before the first. Humans walked the earth. These memories were beautiful and tragic. They told a story of a people who had reached for the stars and found something in the darkness that destroyed them. Eric Lindgren stayed on Titan Base as well. He could not leave. After everything he had seen, ordinary life seemed impossible. He worked as a liaison between the scientists and the military, trying to keep the peace between groups that did not trust each other. It was difficult work, but someone had to do it. The breakthrough came on a cool autumn morning. Maya was exploring a section of Prometheus that she had not visited before. It was deep in the ship's interior, behind doors that had remained sealed until now. The ship had finally decided to show her what was inside. The room she entered was small compared to the rest of Prometheus. It had no weapons, no screens, no control surfaces. There was only a single object in the center. It looked like a crystal, dark blue, and roughly the size of a human head. When Maya approached it, the crystal began to glow. Images filled her mind. Not memories this time, but a message. The creators of Prometheus had left something for whoever found their ship. They had known they were dying. They had known their civilization would not survive. So they had built Prometheus as a gift, a seed of everything they had learned, hidden away where it might be found by those who came after. The crystal contained knowledge. More knowledge than Maya could ever absorb. Science, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, history. Everything the creators had discovered in their millions of years of existence was stored in that small object. It was an inheritance left for the next civilization to find. Maya stood in that room for hours, receiving just a tiny fraction of what the crystal held. When she finally emerged, her face was different. There was something in her eyes that had not been there before. Eric noticed it immediately. He asked her what she had found. She told him everything. She told him about the creators, about their rise and their fall, about the enemy they had faced and lost to. She told him about the crystal and the knowledge it contained. And she told him about the choice that humanity now faced. The creators had left a warning along with their gift. Power without wisdom leads to destruction. They had learned this lesson too late. Their technology had grown faster than their understanding. They had built weapons before they built peace. When the enemy came, they had nothing to fight with except more weapons. And weapons alone could not save them. Prometheus was not just a warship, it was a test. Would humanity make the same mistakes the creators had made? Would they use the knowledge in the crystal to build more weapons, to fight more wars, to destroy each other before they could reach the stars? Or would they learn from the past and choose a different path? Maya shared her discovery with the leaders of the world at a meeting that lasted 3 days. She showed them some of what the crystal contained. She showed them technologies that could end hunger, cure diseases, and clean the pollution that was slowly killing the planet. She also showed them the warning. She made them understand that they were being watched, not by Prometheus, but by history. The choice they made now would echo through the ages. The debate was fierce. Some leaders wanted to use the knowledge for military purposes. They argued that the world was still dangerous, that enemies were everywhere, that strength was the only thing that mattered. Others disagreed. They said that humanity had been given a second chance, a gift from a dying civilization that wanted someone else to succeed where they had failed. To waste that gift on more weapons would be the greatest mistake in human history. In the end, a compromise was reached. The knowledge from the crystal would be shared equally among all nations. An international council would be formed to guide its use. Military applications would be limited and controlled. The focus would be on healing, building, and exploring. Prometheus would remain under international control, guardian that belonged to everyone and no one. It was not a perfect solution. Perfect solutions do not exist for complicated problems. But it was a start. It was a choice to try something different. To learn from the past instead of repeating it, Eric and Maya stood on the deck of Titan Base on the day the agreement was signed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Prometheus sat nearby, silent and watchful as always. Maya wondered if the ship was pleased with humanity's choice. She wondered if the creators, wherever they were, could somehow know that their gift had been received. She did not get an answer. The crystal held knowledge, not comfort. The future was still uncertain. Wars might still come. Leaders might still fail. Humanity might still destroy itself despite everything it had learned. Nothing was guaranteed, but something had changed. A door had been opened. A path had been revealed. Humanity had been given the tools to reach the stars, if they could learn to use them wisely. The inheritance was theirs now. What they did with it would determine everything. Eric asked Maya what she thought would happen. She smiled at him and said she did not know. Nobody knew. That was the strange and wonderful thing about the future. It had not been written yet. The divers who went looking for a submarine had found something far greater. A ship that carried the dreams and warnings of a lost civilization. A crystal that held the knowledge of ages. A choice that would shape the destiny of every human being born from that day forward. They had found a relic. They had unleashed its power. Now they had to decide what to become. The sun disappeared below the horizon. The stars came out, millions of them scattered across the darkness like promises waiting to be kept. Prometheus glowed faintly in the night, patient and eternal, ready to carry humanity wherever they chose to go. The story was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The inheritance had been claimed. The future was waiting. It was time to see what humanity would make of it.